Hey everybody, welcome back to another My PTA video. So in this one I'm going to be going over high blood pressure. So some of the causes behind high blood pressure, these are pretty common. You've probably heard of these, but obesity, kidney disease, smoking, alcohol, older age. So as we get older, unfortunately, we start to develop just hypertension. It's just something that happens. High sodium diet, so a lot of salt. If you're consuming a lot of salt, a lot of sodium, it's going to contribute a lot more to higher blood pressure. If you also have obstructive sleep apnea, that can interfere with a lot of things while you're sleeping, which can in the long run lead to hypertension. Also, if you have a family history of high blood pressure, you're more predisposed to it, obviously. Stress, high stress job, stressful life, things like that also contribute to high blood pressure, and high cholesterol. So from this graph, it kind of seems like we're, fighting a losing battle here. And a lot of times, it's really hard to avoid. And you'll see in some later slides the statistics of the prevalence of high blood pressure and just how common it actually is. So what populations are most at risk? So men are genetically more predisposed than women. 50% of men usually develop hypertension, whereas only around 44%. So not a huge difference. It's still very common, but men are more susceptible to it. Non-Hispanic black men then also are at a much higher rate. So age, like I mentioned before, 18 to 39, 22%. So not very much. But then as you can see, as we get older, it just starts to become more common. So after 60 years of age, 74.5% of people have high blood pressure, which is startling. There's also a statistic of less educated people, so people who haven't graduated or only have a high school equivalency, they have a higher risk of high blood pressure as opposed to college graduates. And then once again, going back to stress, if you work a high stress job like nursing or a doctor or like night shift workers, or where you're working 24 hours in a row and things like that, those jobs tend to contribute more to high blood pressure. So the effects on vitals, there's a lot of different stuff here on the side that I put, but the most common ones are the blood pressure obviously is going to increase. Heart rate is going to increase because the heart has to pump harder and more often to get the amount of blood that it needs to. So because of that, you also have a greater risk of stroke and heart attack because the arteries are a little bit more clogged up, as you can see in the picture here. It's just harder to get blood through those arteries. And the pressure within that arteries is much greater. So you have a risk of developing a hemorrhagic stroke or something like that as well. So coronary artery disease, once again, just a filling of the vessels, usually of the arteries by plaque or something, atherosclerosis, just contributes a lot to it. So a lot of these things can happen as a result of high blood pressure. So medications that you might commonly see, beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, diuretics, calcium channel blockers, things like that. Those are all very, very common things. The most common I've usually seen are beta blockers and calcium channel blockers. Those are usually the most common. Beta blockers tend to be, I think, the most common, if I'm not mistaken. But you'll see a lot of these, and a lot of these are prescribed for different reasons with, patient history and allergic, if somebody's allergic to something, etc. You'll see a different medication administered. So what can we do as a PTA or someone, if you're in therapy, what are we going to do to kind of modify this? So we can use the RPE, or rate of perceived exertion. So on a scale of 10 being the hardest, are you at a 5 or a 6, or is it oh my gosh, this is really hard, I'm at a 9 and I can't do it anymore? There's also the Borg scale, which is basically an RPE, but for more cardiovascular endurance type events. And then the talk test. So this is a really, really good way to do it if you don't want to use the RPE. Are you able to talk during your exercise? If you're able to kind of get some sentences out, you're probably in a safe area. If you're just gasping for breath and you can't talk, you can't communicate at all, it's probably a little too intense. Conversely, if you're doing an exercise and you just can talk perfectly fine, might not be challenging enough. So those are some of my references. I'll move my face out of the way so you can see that there. Do you have high blood pressure? Do you know anybody who does? I'm sure you know somebody who has high blood pressure. It's fairly common, but let me know what you guys thought of this down in the comments below, and I'll catch you in the next one.